Most men fear the executor for the blood on his hands. But tonight, the most dangerous man in the city was being stared down by a 12-year-old boy in a faded hoodie. Ji-hoon had survived wars, betrayals, and empires, but he wasn't prepared for the 4 words that would shatter his silence. "Why are you looking at my mum?" This is the story of a man who was built for war, but found a reason to surrender in a dying cafe, in the eyes of a widow, and in the courage of a boy who refused to be afraid. The rain fell like bullets that night. Not the gentle kind that washes things clean, but the cold, relentless type that soaks through expensive fabric and reminds you that some stains never come out. Ji-hoon Kim stood outside the Grand Meridian Hotel, watching limousines pull up to the entrance, each one carrying another piece of the life his family had built for him. Inside that building, a woman he'd never loved waited in white, a treaty in a wedding dress, a merger sealed with vows neither of them would mean. He was 35 years old, and he'd never made a single choice that was his own. The son of power learns early that freedom is a fairy tale. You don't get to choose your name, your blood, or the weight of the gun they place in your hand when you're still too young to understand what it means to take a life. Ji-hoon had been the middle son, invisible enough to avoid the spotlight, visible enough to be useful. While his older brother Hyun-woo learned diplomacy and inheritance, Ji-hoon learned efficiency. They called him the executor, not because he killed without mercy, but because he killed without hesitation. In his world, red had always meant one thing: violence, the red of brake lights before a hit, the red tie his father wore to funerals of men who'd betrayed the family, the red that pooled and spread and reminded everyone why the Kim name commanded fear. But that night, standing in the rain with his phone vibrating with messages he wouldn't answer, Ji-hoon did something he'd never done before. He ran. Not from danger. He'd walked toward that his entire life. He ran from inevitability, from the altar, from the empire. He ran until his legs burned and his breath came ragged, until he found himself on a street he didn't recognize, in a neighborhood his driver would never take him to, and that's when he saw it. A cafe, small, unremarkable, the kind of place that exists in the margins of a city where people go to be forgotten. The neon sign flickered. Café Elliot. Half the letters were burnt out. Through the rain-streaked window he could see warm light, a few empty tables, and behind the counter, her. Ji-hoon pushed open the door. The bell chimed, a small brass sound that seemed too innocent for what was about to happen. Inside, the cafe smelled like old coffee and something sweeter, cinnamon maybe, or vanilla, the kind of smell that lives in wood and fabric accumulated over years. There were no other customers. Just her, wiping down the counter with slow, deliberate movements, like she had all the time in the world and nowhere else to be. She looked up. Nora Williams was 33 years old, and she was the most beautiful woman Ji-hoon had ever seen. Not because of symmetry or fashion or the things his world valued, but because when their eyes met, he saw something he recognized, exhaustion that runs so deep it becomes dignity. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, and on her wrist a bracelet that looked handmade, the kind a child gives his mother. She didn't smile, didn't ask if he was lost or why a man in a $1,000 suit was dripping rainwater onto her floor at 11 o'clock on Valentine's Day. She just looked at him with those dark, steady eyes and said, "Coffee?" He nodded. Couldn't speak, didn't trust his voice. She poured. Black, no sugar. Somehow she knew. She slid the cup across the counter, and when his fingers wrapped around it, the warmth felt like the first real thing he'd touched in years. "You can sit anywhere," she said, her voice low and textured, like old vinyl. "We're not exactly busy." He chose a table by the window, sat down, drank coffee that was too bitter and too perfect. And for the first time in his life, Ji-hoon Kim, the man who'd ended negotiations with a bullet, who'd built his reputation on being unreadable, felt something crack open inside his chest. It wasn't attraction. Not yet. It was simpler than that. It was the sound of chains he didn't know he was wearing starting to rattle. From somewhere in the back, he heard a door open. Footsteps. A boy emerged, maybe 12, 13, with his mother's eyes and a wariness that made him look older. He carried a cardboard box, set it down behind the counter, and then he noticed Ji-hoon. The boy stared, not with fear, with assessment, like he was deciding whether this stranger was a problem he'd need to handle. Nora touched the boy's shoulder. "Dante, go finish your homework." "I finished." "Then go pretend you didn't." The boy didn't move. He kept his eyes on Ji-hoon, and for a moment the two of them held that gaze, man and boy, both protectors, both carrying more than they should. Finally, Dante walked away. But not before Ji-hoon saw him glance back once, making sure his mother was safe. "So, Ma'am, here's a question for you. Have you ever walked into a place and felt like you'd been searching for it your whole life without knowing? Like some invisible thread had been pulling you there, and the moment you arrived, everything went quiet? Keep listening, because what happens next will show you that sometimes the most dangerous thing a man can do isn't pull a trigger, it's come back." Ji-hoon returned the next night, and the night after that. At first he told himself it was practical. The cafe was neutral ground, far from his family's network of eyes and ears, a place to think, to breathe. But practical men don't memorize the way someone pours coffee, or notice that she always stands on her left foot when she's tired, shifting her weight like an old injury that never healed right. He always sat at the same table, always ordered the same thing. Black coffee, no sugar, sometimes a slice of whatever she'd baked that day, pound cake that tasted like patience, blueberry muffins that were slightly burnt at the edges because the oven was dying and she couldn't afford to replace it. She never asked his name. He never offered it. For 3 months they existed in this strange, silent orbit. He would arrive around 10 after the dinner rush that never really came. She would pour his coffee without asking. Sometimes they'd exchange a few words, weather, news, the small talk of strangers. But mostly they just shared space. Nora moved through that cafe like a woman walking through a museum of her own life. Everything in it was a relic. The wedding photo behind the counter, faded and water-stained, the menu board still written in her dead husband's handwriting, the booth in the corner where Dante had taken his first steps 11 years ago, before the accident that made her a widow at 22. Ji-hoon learned her rhythms, learned that she arrived at 5 in the morning to prep, that she did all the cooking herself, that she smiled at customers but it never reached her eyes, learned that she was drowning, slowly, in debt and memory, and a promise she'd made to a ghost. "Why do you keep this place open?" he asked one night, the words escaping before he could stop them. She was wiping down tables, her movements automatic. She paused, looking at him like she was deciding whether the question deserved an answer. "Because he built it for me," she said finally. "Elliot, my husband, he wanted me to have something that was mine. After he died, everyone told me to sell, said I should move on, start over." She folded the rag in her hands, precise corners. "But if I close this place, it's like saying he never mattered. Like those 11 years were just a noise, even if it's killing you." Her eyes met his, especially then. He understood. God help him, he understood. Because he'd been dying his whole life too, just in a different way. Dying in boardrooms and back alleys, in the space between who he was and who his name required him to be. "What about you?" she asked, turning the question back. "Why do you keep coming here? We both know this isn't your kind of place." He should have lied, should have given her something safe and forgettable. But sitting in that dying cafe with a woman who wore grief like a second skin, Ji-hoon found he didn't have any lies left. "Because when I'm here," he said quietly, "I don't have to be anyone." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Like that made sense. Like maybe she felt the same way. That's when Dante appeared from the back room, backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked at his mother, then at Ji-hoon, and something hardened in his young face. "Mom, I'll walk you home." "I've got another hour, baby." "I'll wait." It wasn't a suggestion. The boy pulled out a chair at the counter, opened a textbook he clearly wasn't reading, and positioned himself between his mother and the stranger who kept showing up uninvited. Ji-hoon had seen soldiers with less commitment. Meanwhile, across the city, in a penthouse office that overlooked everything the Kim family owned, Hyun-woo sat behind his father's desk, soon to be his desk, and studied a report from their head of security. "He's been going out alone," the man said. Tae-jin, the one guard Ji-hoon trusted, stood silent in the corner. "No security, no driver, 3-4 times a week." "Where?" We don't know. He loses the tail every time. Hyunwoo leaned back, fingers steepled. My brother doesn't take walks for his health. He's planning something, find out what. But Ji-hoon wasn't planning anything. For the first time in his life, he wasn't strategizing or calculating or staying 3 moves ahead. He was just present, in a cafe that smelled like burnt coffee and faded dreams, watching a woman piece together a life from broken parts, learning what it felt like to want something that wasn't written in blood. The color red had always meant violence to him, but now, when he closed his eyes, he saw it differently. The red of the setting sun through the cafe window, the red of Nora's lipstick, worn and reapplied a dozen times throughout the day. The red of Valentine's decorations she'd never taken down, because taking them down meant admitting another year had passed and nothing had changed. He was falling. He knew it. And he didn't know how to stop, didn't know if he wanted to. It happened on a Tuesday. Ji-hoon arrived at his usual time, but the cafe was different, darker. Nora was in the back. He could hear her on the phone, her voice tight with the particular stress of bills that won't wait and accounts that won't stretch. Dante sat at the counter, homework spread in front of him, but his eyes tracked Ji-hoon from the moment he walked in. The boy was small for 12, skinny in the way kids get when they grow too fast, all elbows and quiet intensity. But there was nothing childish in the way he watched Ji-hoon choose his usual table, the way he waited until the door closed and they were alone. Then Dante stood, walked over, pulled out the chair across from Ji-hoon and sat down without invitation, without permission, with the kind of confidence that comes from having nothing left to lose. "Why are you looking at my mother?" The question landed like a stone in still water, direct, unafraid, the kind of question that deserved a real answer. Ji-hoon had stared down men twice his size, negotiated with killers, ended lives with less emotion than most people used to order lunch. But this 12-year-old boy, with his mother's eyes and his father's absence, made him pause. "I'm not," he started. "Yes, you are." Dante's voice was steady, old. "Every time you come here, you sit at that table and you watch her, like you're waiting for something, and I need to know what." Most men would have dismissed the kid, laughed it off, gotten defensive, but Ji-hoon recognized something in Dante that made dismissal impossible. He saw himself, the boy who'd been forced to become a man too early, the son who'd learned that love means standing guard, even when you're terrified. So he told the truth. "I don't know," Ji-hoon said quietly. "I know that's not the answer you want, but it's the honest one. I come here because—" He paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound insane. "Because this is the only place I don't feel like I'm drowning." Dante's jaw tightened. "That's not good enough." "You're right, it's not." Ji-hoon leaned forward, elbows on the table, meeting the boy's eyes with the same respect he'd given equal. "You want to know who I am? I'm a man who spent his whole life doing what he was told, being who he was supposed to be. And your mother, she doesn't know me, doesn't know my name, doesn't know where I come from. But when I'm here, I can breathe. That's all this is." "That's not all this is," Dante's voice dropped. "I see how you look at her, and I need you to understand something." He leaned in, and despite being 12, despite the homework and the worn sneakers and the childhood he'd never really had, he looked dangerous. "She's been through enough. My father died when I was 1. She's been holding this place together with duct tape and hope ever since. So if you're just some guy who's bored, if you're here because you think she's easy or lonely or—" "She's not." The words came out harder than Ji-hoon intended. "Your mother is the strongest person I've ever met, and I've met men who built empires." Dante studied him. "Then why don't you talk to her? Why just sit there?" "Because men like me don't get to have things like this." Ji-hoon's voice cracked just slightly. "We don't get quiet. We don't get peace. We get blood and obligation and a name that's heavier than bone. And maybe I'm selfish, coming here. Maybe I should stay away, but I can't." He met Dante's eyes. "So you tell me what you need from me. You tell me how to make this right, and I'll do it." The silence stretched. From the back room they could hear Nora's voice still on the phone, negotiating with someone who wouldn't negotiate back. Finally, Dante spoke. "Don't hurt her, that's all. Whatever you are, whatever you want, don't make it worse for her than it already is. I won't, Ji-hoon said, and he meant it with everything he had left. Dante nodded slowly. Started to stand, then paused. My name's Dante, he said. Ji-hoon. That Korean? Yes. You got family? The question was innocent. The answer wasn't. Yes, Ji-hoon said, but not like yours. Dante seemed to accept that. He went back to the counter, back to his homework, but something had shifted. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. 2 guards who'd called a temporary truce. When Nora emerged 10 minutes later, exhausted and trying to hide it, she found them both exactly where she'd left them, Ji-hoon at his table, Dante at the counter, and neither one mentioned the conversation that had just rewritten the rules. Now let me ask you something, and really think about it. When was the last time someone looked at you and saw past what you do, past what you're supposed to be, and asked you the one question that actually mattered? Not what do you want, but why are you really here? Because that question, that's what broke Ji-hoon's last defense, and you're about to find out what happens when a man built for war discovers he's capable of something far more dangerous than violence. He's capable of change. Simone, the truth came 3 weeks later. Not dramatically, not with gunfire or threats or the theatrical reveals that people imagine when they think about organized crime. It came quietly, the way most important truths do, through a newspaper left on a table and a photograph that couldn't be unseen. Nora was closing up for the night. Dante had already gone home with Ms. Lorraine, the older woman who lived upstairs and watched him when Nora worked late. Ji-hoon sat at his table with coffee gone cold, and between them hung all the things they'd never said. She'd started to notice him differently. The way his hands never shook, even when holding something delicate. The scar along his jawline that he touched when he thought no one was looking. The way he always sat facing the door, back to the wall, soldier's habit, survivor's instinct. You ever gonna tell me why you really come here? She asked, wiping down the table next to his. I told Dante the truth. I come here because I can breathe. That's not a reason, that's a symptom. She looked at him directly. What are you running from, Ji-hoon? He'd never heard his name in her voice before. It sounded different, softer, like maybe it could belong to someone other than the executor. Everything, he said simply. She should have left it there, should have let him keep his secrets. But Nora Williams had been brave once. Brave enough to marry young, brave enough to stay standing when the world took everything. And some of that bravery still lived in her, beneath the exhaustion. I'm closing in 15 minutes, she said. You want to tell me the truth before then, or you want to keep pretending we're strangers? He opened his mouth to answer. That's when Tae-jin walked through the door. Ji-hoon stood immediately, body language shifting from peaceful to predatory in half a breath. What are you doing here? Your brother sent me. Tae-jin's eyes flicked to Nora, back to Ji-hoon. He knows about the cafe, he knows about her, and he wants you back at the house, tonight. The temperature in the room dropped. Nora felt it, the sudden electricity, the sense that she was watching something much larger and more dangerous than she'd understood. She looked at Ji-hoon, and for the first time she saw it, the careful stillness, the controlled violence, the way Tae-jin deferred to him despite being twice his size. You should go, she said quietly. Nora, go. He wanted to argue, wanted to explain, but Tae-jin was already at the door and the look on his face said this wasn't optional. Ji-hoon left, and Nora, hands shaking, pulled out her phone and did what she should have done months ago. She searched his name. The first result was a news article, 3 years old. Kim family lieutenant walks free after witness recounts. There was a photo, Ji-hoon in a suit, flanked by lawyers, his face expressionless as cameras flashed. The second result was worse. Organized crime in the Korean district, the executioner's rise. She read until the words stopped making sense, read about violence and territory and a family that ran the city's underworld like a business, read about the middle son who'd earned his reputation by being efficient, cold, unstoppable. She read until Dante came home and found her crying at the counter, phone still glowing in her hand. Mom, what happened? She couldn't speak, just handed him the phone. Dante read. His face went carefully blank, that look he wore when trying to be older than 12, trying to be the man she needed. I'm calling the police, he said. And tell them what? That a customer has been polite and quiet for 3 months? She laughed, bitter. They'll laugh us out of the station. Then we close, we sell, we leave. With what money, baby? We're 3 months behind on rent. The oven's dying, the roof leaks, we're barely... She stopped, took a breath. We can't run from this. Then what do we do? Before she could answer, the bell above the door chimed. Ji-hoon stood in the doorway, soaked from rain she hadn't noticed starting, still in his suit from earlier, but different now, like he'd been somewhere that had cost him something. Get out, Dante said, stepping in front of his mother. I will, but first, she deserves to know the truth. Ji-hoon's eyes found Nora's. All of it. I know enough, she said, voice shaking. I know you're a criminal. I know you've hurt people. I know what the articles say. He took a step forward, stopped when Dante tensed. And it's all true, every word. I am my family's weapon. I've done things that would make you sick. I've lived a life covered in blood, and I don't get to apologize for that or pretend it didn't happen. His voice cracked. But I need you to understand something. The man who did those things, he's been dead for months. He died the night he walked into this cafe and saw you. That's not how it works, Nora said, tears hot on her face. You don't just stop being who you are. You're right. He smiled, sad and broken. That's why I went to my brother tonight. That's why I told him I'm out, that I'm walking away from the family, the business, all of it. The silence was deafening. You're lying, Dante said. I'm not. Ji-hoon pulled something from his pocket, a red silk tie, the kind his family wore to meetings. He'd cut it in half. In my world, this means severance. It means I'm not protected anymore. It means if I stay in this city, I'm dead within a week. Nora stared at the ruined tie. Why would you do that? Because I'm tired of chains. He looked at her with everything he'd never been allowed to feel. My whole life I've been my father's son, my family's soldier, the executor. I've worn red as a warning, as a threat, as the color of everything I've destroyed. But when I see you... He stopped, swallowed. When I see you in that red lipstick you wear, in this cafe with Valentine's decorations you never take down, I see something different. I see hope. I see survival. I see the color of a beating heart instead of a stopped one. That's... Nora's voice broke. That's not fair. You can't just walk in here and... I know it's not fair. I know I have no right to any of this. But I need you to understand that you're not the only one in chains. He gestured around the cafe. You stay here because you think you owe it to Elliot. You think leaving means forgetting, means betrayal. But Nora, what if staying is the betrayal? What if he built this place so you could be happy, and you're using it as a prison instead? She slapped him. The sound cracked through the cafe like a gunshot. Dante moved to pull her back, but she shook him off, tears streaming now. You don't get to talk about my husband, she said, voice raw. You don't get to walk in here after 3 months of silence and tell me how to grieve. You don't... She stopped, breath coming in gasps. You don't get to make me hope for something I can't have. Why can't you? Because I'm broke. The words exploded out of her. Because this cafe is dying and I'm drowning and I've got a son to raise, and dreams don't pay bills. Because even if I wanted to start over, even if I wanted to believe you, I can't afford to be wrong. Ji-hoon reached into his jacket. Dante tensed, but what he pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a check. $400,000, Ji-hoon said quietly. It's everything I've saved over 15 years of doing my family's work. Blood money, every cent. I was going to use it to disappear, to start over somewhere they'd never find me. He set it on the counter between them. But I'm giving it to you instead. Sell this place, pay off your debts, take Dante somewhere safe, somewhere new. Use it to buy your freedom. Nora stared at the check like it might bite her. I can't. Yes, you can, and you will. Because I'm not asking you to choose me. I'm asking you to choose yourself. His eyes held hers. I'm leaving this city tomorrow. I have to. But whether you come with me or not, whether I ever see you again or not, you're taking this money and you're getting out. That's not negotiable. What about you? Dante asked quietly. If you leave your family, where will you go? Somewhere far, somewhere quiet, somewhere I can learn to be someone new. Ji-hoon looked at the boy who'd become his unexpected ally. You asked me not to hurt your mother. I'm keeping that promise, but I'm also asking her to do something harder than staying. What? Nora whispered. Trust that leaving isn't betrayal. It's survival. He turned to go. Wait. Nora's voice stopped him at the door. If I did this, if I sold this place, if I took your money, if I... She couldn't say it. Couldn't voice the impossible thing. Where would we even go? Ji-hoon smiled, small and real and heartbreaking. Somewhere without winter. Somewhere Dante can go to a good school. Somewhere you can open a new cafe if you want. Or never make another cup of coffee if you don't. Somewhere. Somewhere we can just be normal, Dante finished. Yeah, Ji-hoon said. Normal sounds good. Nora looked at her son, at the check on the counter, at the cafe that had been her prison and her memorial and her entire world for 11 years. Then she looked at Ji-hoon, really looked at him, past the violence and the danger and the impossible risk, and saw a man as trapped as she was, offering the only key he had. We leave in 3 days, she said, decision settling into her bones like truth. We sell fast, we pack light, and we don't look back. Agreed. And Ji-hoon, she stepped closer. If you're lying, if this is some kind of game, then Dante has my permission to kill me himself, he said seriously. The boy almost smiled at that. Almost. 1 year later, February 14th. The cafe didn't exist anymore. Someone had bought the building, gutted it, turned it into a trendy wine bar with exposed brick and craft cocktails. Nora had seen photos online. Dante had searched it out of curiosity, and felt nothing. Not sadness, not nostalgia, just the quiet relief of a closed chapter. They lived in Monterey now, California, small coastal town where nobody knew their names or cared where they came from. Dante went to a good school, a real school with art classes and a basketball team he'd made junior varsity for, despite being the smallest kid trying out. He was 13 now, and sometimes Nora caught glimpses of the child he should have been all along. Ji-hoon worked at a bookstore. It was almost funny how ordinary he'd become. The man who'd been feared across 2 states now spent his days shelving novels and recommending mysteries to tourists. He'd let his hair grow longer, traded his suits for jeans and flannel, and developed a genuine obsession with detective fiction. On Sundays, he taught Korean language classes at the community center. On Wednesdays, he coached Dante's basketball team, despite knowing nothing about the game. He was learning to be soft. It didn't come naturally, but he was trying, and Nora... She didn't have a cafe anymore, but she baked. For farmers' markets, for local restaurants, for the sheer joy of creating something that people consumed with gratitude instead of obligation. She'd started using her late husband's life insurance, money she'd been too guilty to touch for 11 years, to invest in her future instead of his memory. She wore colors now, not just black. Sometimes she wore red. It meant something different now. Not violence, not mourning, just life. Bold and beautiful and brief. They weren't married. They'd agreed on that early. Too many ghosts, too many complications. But they lived together in a small house 3 blocks from the ocean, and sometimes at night, after Dante went to bed, they'd sit on the porch and watch the waves and talk about nothing important. That's where they were now. Valentine's Day, exactly 1 year after Nora had sold the cafe, and they'd all climbed into a used car with everything they owned and drove west until the road ran out. You ever regret it? Nora asked, her head on his shoulder. Every day, Ji-hoon said honestly. She pulled back, hurt flickering across her face. Not this, he clarified quickly. Never this. I regret what I had to do to get here. The people I hurt, the years I wasted. But this? You, Dante, this life? He shook his head. This is the first thing I've ever done that feels real. From inside the house, they could hear Dante on the phone with a girl from his class. Awkward teenage flirting, the kind that made them both smile. He's happy, Nora said softly. I never thought I'd be able to give him that. You gave him more than happiness. You gave him permission to be a kid. We gave him that, she corrected. You're his family now too, whether you planned for it or not. I didn't plan for any of this, Ji-hoon admitted. I've never had a plan that didn't involve violence or strategy or staying 10 steps ahead, but this, I'm just here, present, And it's terrifying and perfect, and I have no idea what I'm doing. That's called being human, Nora said, smiling. Welcome to it. He kissed her then, soft and slow, tasting like salt air and second chances. When they pulled apart, she noticed something on the porch table. A small box wrapped in simple brown paper. What's this? Open it. Inside was a bracelet. Not expensive. Ji-hoon had learned that she valued meaning over money. It was woven leather, dark brown and red threads twisted together. The brown is for earth, he explained, suddenly nervous, for being grounded, for home. And the red is for heart, she finished. Yeah. She put it on, right next to the one Dante had made her years ago. New and old, grief and hope, sitting side by side on her wrist like proof that both could exist at once. I got you something too, she said. You didn't have to. I wanted to. She handed him a book, old leather-bound, the kind of thing you find in antique shops. He opened it carefully, and inside, she'd written a single sentence on the first page. For the man who taught me that freedom isn't about having no chains. It's about choosing which ones to keep. He stared at the words until they blurred. Is this a journal for you to write in? Your story, your version, not the one your family wrote, not the one the newspapers printed, yours. He didn't cry. Men like Ji-hoon had learned too early that tears were weakness. But his hands shook as he held that book, and Nora pretended not to notice. Inside, Dante called out, Mom, Ji-hoon, there's a documentary on about sea otters. They looked at each other and laughed, real laughter, the kind that comes from joy instead of just politeness. We should go watch sea otters, Nora said. Definitely. But they stayed on the porch for one more moment, just the two of them, the ocean, and the quiet miracle of getting to start over. A year ago, Ji-hoon had fled an altar to find an escape. He'd found a cafe instead, and a woman who understood imprisonment, and a boy who'd forced him to be honest. He'd found the hardest question he'd ever been asked, not, what have you done, but who do you want to become? And the answer, it turned out, was simple. He wanted to become free. Not free from consequences. Those would follow him forever. Not free from his past. You don't erase 15 years of violence with good intentions. But free to choose. Free to love. Free to sit on a porch in a small coastal town and watch a woman wear red lipstick like a declaration of war against everything that tried to break her. The cafe was gone. The empire was gone. The executor was gone. And in their place was something terrifying and fragile and real. A family, chosen, built, maintained not through blood or obligation, but through the daily decision to stay, to try, to believe that people can change if they want it badly enough. Come on, Nora said, standing and pulling him up with her. Let's go learn about sea otters. Why do I get the feeling Dante already knows everything about sea otters and is going to quiz us? Because you're learning, she said, smiling. You're learning how families work. They walked inside together, leaving the door open behind them, letting the sound of the ocean fill the house. Ji-hoon had to lose everything to find out who he was without the weight. Nora had to release the ghost she'd been serving to discover she was still alive. And Dante had to watch two broken adults choose courage over comfort to learn that family isn't about blood. It's about showing up every single day and deciding that today, you'll be a little braver than yesterday. 1 year later, they were free. Not perfect, not without scars, but free. And if they could do it, a Mafia enforcer, a widow in mourning, and a boy who'd been forced to grow up too fast, then maybe, just maybe, so can you. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment. Tell me your story, because we're all carrying chains we don't talk about. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you want to put them down. Until next time.